All right.
This morning's speaker will highlight the beginning of the Summerlin Rotary Club's signature project, a child sex trafficking awareness campaign here in Clark County, Nevada. A committee is working diligently on developing and implementing the project, which is scheduled to launch in July of 2021. The genesis for the club's project comes from Rotary District 5280 in the Los Angeles area. There are some 60 clubs that are under the umbrella of a Rotary district. In 2017, then District Governor Cosette Vergere established a child sex trafficking task force, and I was her senior assistant governor for communications and worked with Cosette on the project. Our speaker today, Elynne Green, will paint a picture to highlight the issue of child sex trafficking in Clark County. She is the manager of victim services and human trafficking for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and she is also manager of the Southern Nevada Human Trafficking Task Force and the Responders Support Team in Clark County. Elynne also serves on the Survivors and Providers Stakeholders Forum of the National Mass Violence and Victimization Resource Center. Let's welcome Elynne Green.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you so much for having me. And over the next 10 minutes or so, it's going to be like drinking through a fire hose. So we're going to go through a lot of information quickly, but I really hope is that we will use this time to start conversations that will continue long after this meeting, because in 10 minutes, there's no way to really cover the scope and answer all of the questions. So first of all, do we have the PowerPoint available?
Yes. Michael?
If not, I can move on without it. Really what I want to do is there's a lot of misinformation out there, and that misinformation can actually cause a lot of harm in terms of identifying potential victims and providing services. So I really want to focus a little bit on that. Thank you. Next slide. So looking at some of the myths versus the realities, there's a lot of information out there to parents. Victims are being abducted. Be careful at the mall. Be careful in the parking lots. Children are being kidnapped. That's a myth. We have maybe 5 or 6 kidnappings on average a year across the country. What happens is recruitment happens at home. It starts when children are online and parents don't know where they are. And I can't imagine that many parents would say, go ahead, go down some dark alleys at midnight and then just come on home when you're done walking down those dark alleys. That's what the internet becomes for some of these children. So knowing where your children are in the virtual world, as well as understanding what some of these websites are about, understanding the basics around Instagram and some of that, that you're going to know that your children maybe have social media footprint. That's where recruitment begins. And it literally is a recruitment process. The other myth is it's usually a violent crime. What we know is that it's very rare, and it does happen, I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's very rare that a trafficker is going to recruit someone and start beating them immediately. What happens is it's a psychological process. They believe that this person cares about them. This person's filling a need in their life. So as a result of that, they develop a bond, a relationship that's very challenging to break, even when there is violence introduced, even when that person is fearful. They will often protect the trafficker. Next slide. So the problem that we have when we have misinformation out there about child sex trafficking is it distorts the reality of what trafficking is really about. So for example, when you see images of victims that are bound in chains and held in closets and badly beaten, When you see a victim that's walking down the street and they appear to be smiling and they look clean, we say, maybe they're not really a victim. Maybe this was their choice. So the problem is the images, those graphic images of people held in chains, creates a false image. And therefore it distorts our reality of what we're looking at when we're looking at child sex trafficking. And it also puts the victims at risk, because when cases go to court, imagine a jury saying, well, why didn't she leave? We also have to recognize that victims, it's not just females, it's males. Our gay, lesbian, and transgender population are at great risk. We also know from the data that we collect locally, and I want to caution, any numbers that I give you, any numbers that you hear from any organization is only the tip of the iceberg. It's what we know. And it's really important that we acknowledge the fact that we don't know where all the victims are. So for example, in the first 6 months of the year, the first 6 months of 2020, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department identified 59 minor victims. Now, that doesn't mean that there was only 59 victims in our community. We know that there's a disproportionate number of African American children that are being trafficked. And we had 4 that were 13 years or younger. And 47 of those 59 were local. They were children that live in our community, that were born in our community, that went to our schools. So I think that's another important thing that we have to understand, because it's not children coming from other countries. It's not children that are coming from other states, although that does happen, especially when we have big events on a weekend. Fight weekends are a priority where we have additional officers out looking to identify missing children. And that brings up another point. Every year, states will do a 2 to 3 week sort of collaboration between DEA, FBI, HSI, which is Homeland Security, local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and they will scour the streets looking for missing children. There was recently information that came out that in the state of Georgia, there were 39 children that were rescued. And I'm going to come back to the word rescue in a minute. Those 39 children, 5 of them were victims of human trafficking. The others were missing children, some parental abduction. So again, we have to look at the big picture when we're looking at what these statistics really mean. And by the way, there was some misinformation that all of them were rescued out of a double-wide trailer. Now, going back to that word rescued, we have to be really careful. We rescue puppies. We rescue kittens from the well. We don't rescue people. We empower them to heal. The words that we use when we're doing outreach, when we're doing social media, when we're doing community awareness is so important. And we do a lot of training around what words to use. For example, when you think of a 14 or 15-year-old that is selling sex in exchange for money, she's a victim. She's not a teen prostitute. We don't use that word because by federal and state law, she's a victim of a crime, just like a sexual assault victim, just like a victim of child sexual abuse. Next slide. So the Southern Nevada Human Trafficking Task Force is a conglomeration, a collaboration, a partnership between state, local, and federal law enforcement, prosecutors, business owners, victim advocates, medical community, everybody. We need a whole village because each and every one of those victims, it's not as simple as getting them out of the situation. It's all of the layers, the medical, the emotional, the physical, the financial needs that come up. Many of them have been deprived of education. Think of a child that is trafficked and they're out of school for a period of time. We know how social media works and we know the networks within the schools, and then they return to school after they've been taken out of the life, they've gone through some therapy. Everyone knows where they've been. So it's a hard transition. And again, it goes back to that whole village. So when we're creating those public awareness campaigns, we have to be very cognizant of both the words that we use and the information that we provide, making sure that the statistics are vetted, that we're not perpetuating some of the myths that come out of social media, that hit the news, the misinterpretations. That's so critical. And what we try to do is we try to get as much vetted statistics that we are more than glad to share with anybody. And we also have multidisciplinary teams that do our training. And the reason we do it as a multidisciplinary team, law enforcement and a victim advocate, and maybe even a business owner, is because I call it the good housekeeping seal of approval. When you see law enforcement hand in hand with a victim advocate, it gives credibility to them. When we have business owners standing up as part of our team, we see that there's much more success. When we ask a business owner to post the hotline, for example, we work very closely. Our hotels have been amazing partners with us, putting information in the back of the house and training employees at all different levels as to how to identify a potential victim. Next slide. So one of the things that's really important is when we're out doing public awareness campaigns, when we're doing education and training, we're not asking the individuals, once they identify a potential victim, to then go ahead and quote unquote save that person. We want them to reach out to the professionals. And we partner with the RISE program, which is out of our Rape Crisis Center. And RISE stands for Resources, Integration, Services, and Empowerment, which really is exactly what we want to do for each and every victim to help them become a survivor. We provide training, outreach, education. They respond 24/7 with law enforcement. And this is really important because when we're responding to victims, it is very rare that they say, yes, I want help. It is very rare. Usually there's a little bit of spitting and cursing and yelling and screaming and denying and, hating the police. We want them to get help, even if they won't cooperate with law enforcement, which is why we have victim advocates on scene, because they can make that initial connection. And we want to make sure that all of the services that are provided are victim-centered and trauma-informed. One of the biggest problems that we have in our community is a broken foster care system. And that broken foster care system is based on, and I've talked to foster care providers and administrators around the country, and the biggest problem is it's the warm body theory. We don't have enough families for these children. But what we also know is that children that have been exploited, sex trafficking victims, even labor trafficking victims that are juveniles, two things happen. One is they were throwaway children. We know that a majority of our runaways are children out of the foster care system. So they were thrown away, so to speak, into the foster care system. And then they were not reported missing for 14 days or more. That sends a really strong message. We know that these children have significant needs that differ from a child who was neglected or a child whose parents are unable to care for them because they're either incarcerated or there's medical issues or substance abuse. These children have significant needs that are not being addressed, which is why after 14 days of being missing, foster parents are going, oh, I'm so glad that we can finally have a quiet dinner, as opposed to, being concerned about that child. And we hear stories about children being placed on the corner with that plastic bag filled with their belongings and the foster parent calling their caseworker saying, I can't do this anymore. This is where the child is. So it's a broken system. It's a system that we have to work together to educate and support foster parents so that they have the resources. So we don't ask people, when you identify a victim, to start providing services. We ask people to reach out and be able to access the services that do exist, that we know are there, that we know are victim-centered and trauma-informed. Next slide. So here's my contact information. I'm allowing some time for some immediate questions, but I really encourage you, since, as I said earlier, I just kind of put that fire hose out there and let it go. So I really hope that you'll reach out if you have questions, if you want more specific data, if you want more information about resources. We have a Facebook page that we encourage people to visit. We post information, and that's LVMPD, Human Trafficking Task Force. And we don't allow posting of questions or comments. We handle those privately. But I really encourage you to, reach out. We can connect you. We're looking at creating some virtual community meetings. We used to do quarterly community meetings where we would do a little bit of training and allow some networking and introduce people to each other. Unfortunately, going virtual with 200 people is a little bit more challenging. We used to get upwards of 150 to 200 people sometimes at our meetings. So we're looking at some virtual trainings, and we can keep you in the loop so that you can have access to these mini trainings. And I really welcome any questions. You can email me, and thank you so much for giving me this time.
Oh, this has been very, very interesting. And our committee that is meeting about this discussed how we can become involved. And I think you hit on a key component. No, we're not going to physically go out and try to talk to these folks. We want to bring awareness to the situation. Is that correct, Michael?
Yes, that is correct. We just want to do an awareness campaign. We will not have any contact with victims or work with them. That is not our reason for the committee and what we want to do.
And we absolutely appreciate that. In fact, I am going to send, Michael, I can send it to you, and then you are welcome to share it. On the 24th, we're doing from 1 to 4 in the afternoon. It's virtual. It is marketing for our community about human trafficking. It's a workshop that was done up north in person, and unfortunately we now have to do it virtually, but it's a training about how to market, how to do outreach programs. So I will send that to you. You are welcome to share it, and then RSVP by the 21st if you want, and we'll be sending out the link. We're not sure what platform we're going to use just yet, because Zoom, a lot of agencies don't allow it. So we're looking at a couple different platforms. So this is another opportunity to kind of fill your toolbox with some resources. So I will send you that invitation.
Oh, that's great, because education and awareness is really part of what our club needs to do.
Linda, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Hi, nice to meet you. You mentioned in there something about labor trafficking. How prevalent is that compared to the sex trafficking?
You know what? Labor trafficking is more difficult to identify. It is absolutely something that is prevalent, but we just don't know the scope of it, because sex trafficking, you'll see, for example, the victims might be walking in certain areas in the community, soliciting business, or in the hotels or whatever. Labor trafficking happens behind closed doors, and there's a lot of reasons that people don't report it when they themselves are victims, or it doesn't come to our attention. So it happens a lot more than we know, but it is absolutely something that does happen in our community.
Elynne, in October, on the 24th of October, our district hosts a peace conference online. And it's virtual this year, but last year I attended in person, and human sex trafficking was one of the topics. It was just mind-blowing what we learned at that conference. And that conference this year, October 24th, is virtual, and it's free, and it's open to the public. And all of that information is in our newsletter.
I am making a note of that. Thank you.
You're so welcome. I'll send you the information after the meeting. Who else has a question for Elynne?
Lynn, do you work with or coordinate with local organizations that kind of specialize in this area?
We absolutely do. And that was, for example, the RISE program is one of them. I sort of call them the head of the octopus. We filter into them, and then they reach out to lots of community organizations. And we're very, very careful. We try to vet them to make sure that they have the proper training, that they are responding to victims in a trauma-informed and sensitive way, and that they understand human trafficking. We could not do this without our community partners.
Anyone else have a question?
Linda, I have one. It's Dave Paget. How are you? Lynn, it's nice listening to you, and I kind of had a couple of aha moments as I was listening to your presentation. I just had a question, and I thought Michael said it eloquently, what our focus is as a club, but is there anything else that a club like ours can do that's diverse, made up of a lot of small business owners, that would be assistance to your efforts?
Well, the awareness is, and when I first met Michael, that was my, wow, we have this incredible group of people that can help raise awareness. But we ask our business owners to be aware. For example, we did a campaign about a year ago with some of the 7-Eleven businesses to post information about human trafficking. It's those clerks at 2 a.m. that can identify the victim that comes in on a fairly regular basis at 2 a.m. to get a soda or use the restroom. So having that information available is really important. There's lots of opportunities with some of our nonprofit partners for volunteer work throughout the year. These are some of the things that we engage our businesses and our business community to get involved with. We also do a lot of outreaches, and we select areas, and having businesses that have information about human trafficking, the national hotline, for example, the national hotline number posted so that someone can call and get information or get support. And we are connected with the national hotline. They filter those calls back